It's time for another episode of the Global Meditation Podcast. This weekly show features explorations of spiritual and paranormal topics with a focus on bridging the physical and metaphysical, bringing deeper meaning to our individual and collective lives. And now here's your host, Darby Miller.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to part 2 of my initial 2-part interview with Matthew Roberts. Matthew is the author of Initiated, UAP, Dreams, Depression, Delusions, Shadow People, Psychosis, Sleep Paralysis, and Pandemics. In 2015, Matthew was a U.S. Naval service member stationed aboard the USS Theodore Roosevelt. The events that transpired during their 2015 workup cycle brought us the first ever declassified footage of unidentified aerial phenomenon, otherwise known as UAP, and the New York Times article entitled Glowing Auras and Black Money, the Pentagon's Mysterious UFO Program. Subsequently, he transferred to the Office of Naval Intelligence in Washington, D.C., where he began to have frequent and often intense personal experiences with the phenomenon. He discovered through a long, painful, and terrifying journey that the truth of the phenomenon has deep and profound implications for the future of the human race. It may seem like a bold statement, but the ultimate universal truth that underlies the phenomenon is captured in the simple yet eloquent words of Mark Twain. The two most important days in your life are the day you were born and the day you find out why. And Matthew's book is available in both paperback and Kindle versions at Amazon.com. As I said, this is part 2 of our interview. If you haven't listened to part 1, I do recommend that you listen to that first. That was aired last week. You can find it in the podcasting apps and on YouTube.com. And part 2, Matthew continues his fascinating, terrifying, and ultimately illuminating experiences with this phenomenon. So let's go ahead and transition to the interview now. Enjoy. So we can segue back to this experience with this female entity. You were raped, and you started to think about it, and noticing that there was some signs pointing at you toward that this was more than just a rape, that this possibly were signposts to something else. Mm-hmm. And what was the next step on that journey for you after that?
So the next step was just, I experienced months of just terror, and I was just constantly afraid. I was just filled with anxiety. And I was starting to get angry that I was, constantly filled with fear and anger and anxiety. I wasn't sleeping. There were a lot of nights I would just sit up all night long on the side of my bed and in my uniform, and then I would just stand up when my alarm went off and I would go to work, and so it was a lot of that. And I was just so exhausted, I was just so tired. And I thought, I don't know where all this is going. I know that there's something here. I need to keep going with this because I want to get to the bottom of it. But at the same time, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to die if I keep this up. So I just, in just like a kind of a fit of rage one day, I decided I was done. I was done with this. I had started reading other books by the same author as the guy who wrote The Kabbalion, William Walker Atkinson, and I had been going through those and reading them, and it wasn't making much sense to me. Like I said, there were indications, little things that told me that there was something deeper, something more. but I still wasn't getting it. And so I was like, forget it. I'm done. I'm throwing these books in the garbage in the morning. I am done with this. Don't bother me again. I don't want to see another one of you guys in my room at night. Forget it, So, of course, that night, I went to bed and I don't know how I fell asleep. I was so angry. I could have put a hole in a wall. I was that angry. So I fall asleep, and at some point in the night I wake up, and of course my room is blurry, and I was like, here we go. And as I'm coming to, like, my room starts to come into focus a little bit, and I'm looking across my nightstand. I can't move, of course, because that's also, a telltale sign that it's them. And all of a sudden, he comes into focus. There's this small man standing there on the other side of my nightstand. And the only word I can use to describe him is like yard gnome. He looked like a yard gnome. He had a beard and long white hair, and it was like locked. This beard and his hair. He looked very clean. He was like all white, almost kind of a little bit of a glow to him, and he had on these large black glasses. They were like goggles, and I could see that there was a light inside the glass, because I could see the ridge of his nose underneath the glass in the red glow. And I was like looking at him, and I thought, what is this? This little yard gnome looking guy. And so I'm a little bit puzzled. At first I was angry when he woke me up, but then due to his appearance, I was a little, I don't know, I guess I wanted to laugh a little bit. So, he's staring at me and I'm staring at him. And then he says, don't give up, keep going. And so, and then he puts me back to sleep, and I'm like, I was so instantly angry that he had come back to tell me that I kind of thought to myself, F you, before he put me to sleep. But I woke up the next morning, and as I said, I like to think things through. I like to analyze things. And I thought to myself, he probably knows something I don't. Clearly he knows something I don't. Any being that can construct a craft that can fly around as fast as you want to go, surely knows a few things about the universe that I don't. So maybe I should just listen. So I thought, well, how could I possibly keep going? Because I was just so terrified. And I thought, I have to just let it go. I'll let it go. And that's what I did. I had been in like this haunted house like years earlier. You know how you can, at Halloween, you can pay to go into these haunted houses. Mm-hmm. And I'm walking around in there, and I'm with some friends, and some of them are girls, and they're like screaming and grabbing onto me, and and so I halfway through this haunted house, I thought to myself, why am I afraid? None of this is real. I don't have to be afraid. And I turned it off. And I just walked through the rest of the haunted house. People are jumping out. I'm like, oh yeah, that's great. And I thought, why can't I do that now? And I thought, I can do that now. So I did. And that was when the experience became something else entirely, It
was a real pivot point.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Because it was like an instant, And it's crazy because it was like instant clarity in that moment. It was just like, it left me, and I was like, oh my God, you know? and it was at that point that I realized that my whole life, you know, had been just this collection of my emotional self and the way I was, projecting it on the world out there. And that's just not the way it was. It was like instantly I knew that in giving it up. It was incredible, really. That realization.
It was more than just thinking back to that haunted house experience and saying, you know, I can do that now too. And letting go of the fear. You were in that moment when you made that pivot, you were seeing something else. Can you talk more about that? Once the fear dropped, what opened up?
Well, you know, that was when, are you referring to like the dream states that I was having, or?
Well, I'm actually referring to what you were just talking about. It seems like it was more than just that you were suddenly not afraid. Right. You turned off that fight or flight thing that was going on. But it sounded like you were talking about the whole difference between the extroverted projection of emotions versus introverted, you know, bringing them inside and taking responsibility for them. Is that what you were just talking about?
Oh yeah, absolutely. That was, and it was after that, you know, it kind of became, it became very easy to look back at my own life and see how the things that I was doing were just projections of myself, you know, and it became like a new way to perceive, a brand new perception, you know. And I think in like Christianity, a lot of people talk about the eyes to see, you know, and the ears to hear. This is what they're referring to. Because suddenly I was able to see this. It was so obvious, you know. And most people don't reach that point ever. But when you let go of these things, you're no longer viewing the universe and the world through a subjective reality lens, if that makes any sense. Like, everyone has these glasses on, right? And these glasses are their own personalities, their own interpretations of things. Some of those things are not well thought out. And so they view the world through this subjective lens that they view themselves through and everything else. And in kind of putting this together in your own mind and opening yourself up to experience, you take these glasses off. And for the first time in your life, you can see objective reality for the first time. And it's a whole new way of viewing the world. And
that happened right when you dropped the fear?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Okay. It was like immediate. It was like a switch. Something went off. And I could clearly see too that we talk about introversion and extroversion as just simple personality traits. And that's not the case. That is not the case at all. These are not simple personality traits. These are two different and very unequal mental planes of existence. And they don't see each other at all. And I think that's part of the reason why we have so much civil unrest right now, is because everybody has their own perspective, and they're viewing the world subjectively rather than objectively, and that's a huge problem.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought that that perspective of the current political climate, which you wrote about in your book's very current. I mean, your book references the pandemic. Recently, what was it, 2020 when it was published?
Yeah, November 2020.
Yeah, so it was. I thought that looking at how your concept of these two different styles of dealing with emotions.
Right.
Of the extrovert and introvert, and how that relates to our political climate, among other things, was interesting. So you almost, it sounds like at the drop of a hat, you made this pivot and you decided, I'm not going to be afraid anymore. And you also started having this experience where you were able to look back and see reality for what it truly was. With your emotional projection pulled back, would that be a way? I'm having a little. I really want to grasp what that was like for you, and I'm having a little bit of trouble. But that's the way it is, right? You probably can't totally describe it because you have to experience it.
Yeah, exactly. And it became apparent to me in reading some of Plato's works that. I was reading The Republic, and of course, within The Republic is Plato's allegory of the cave, right? And he writes about, once again, about allegory, because that's how all of this communicates with us. It communicates with us through symbols and a language we don't understand, which is allegory. And within the allegory, you have these people chained to a cave in a cave. They're staring at this wall, and all they know is that cave wall, and that is reality to them. But then one day, one of them escapes, and he leaves the cave, and he's like, "Oh my God, there's this whole world out here," and then he comes back to the cave, and he tries to tell the other occupants about what he's seen, and they just don't believe him. It's, oh, what are you talking about? You're crazy, and so that this is an experience that Plato obviously had, in my opinion, and it's just the next step in human evolution, and it's been ongoing for a very long time. And Plato was someone who certainly expressed that sentiment in Allegory of the Cave, and in speaking about this, because you can't really relay it to someone else in any kind of way that does it justice. And I say that in the beginning of my book, that here's my book. I'm describing these things, but I know that description is inadequate. I can never completely convey this idea to you because it's something that you have to experience yourself. And then it borders on, magic and mysticism, because it's just so unbelievable and different.
So you had an experience described in your book where, if I'm recalling it correctly, you're driving and you have a vision of your death.
Right.
It's some type of an automobile accident. Is that right?
Yeah. I was driving. I think I was driving home from work one day down the 5. And
this is after the you dropped the fear. Some point after that.
Yeah, it was, and I still kind of was like, where's all this going? A little bit, because the experiences in being able to see, objective reality, they were eye-opening, but at the same time, it was like, and what am I supposed to do with that? Okay, So I'm driving down the road and I'm like, where is this going? Exactly. And then I heard this voice in my head, and it said, something about you're supposed to act as a shepherd of men, but there's not much time. And I was just like, I was cringing at that, because I was like, no, I've been an atheist my whole life, and you're going to tell me shepherd of men? That sounds ridiculous. That's, that's wrong.
It's probably a healthy sign. That's what I want to hear from someone's reaction when they hear that they're going to be a shepherd of men.
Right. And I've since just I kind of understand that just means, go out and teach people what you've learned. And it doesn't mean, that's all it means. That's all it's ever meant. And I think that they've always used this language. That's why, pharaohs in ancient Egypt were buried, and with their hands crossed, and they're holding shepherding tools in their hands, because this is the kind of language that's always been used. And so that I'm kind of more comfortable with that idea that it's just, you're a teacher, but, and I wish they would have just said that instead, but they didn't. Yeah. So, I'm driving down the road, and this voice says, you're act just a shepherd of men, but there's not much time. And I thought, well, what do you mean there's not much time? Does that mean I'm going to die? And the voice said, yes. And just as it said yes, I was like, instantly, I was not in the same place. I was driving through an intersection. It was nighttime. And I had previously been driving during the day, and there's police lights all over the place, and I feel like I'm being chased. And then this car comes like at a high rate of speed and just T-bones me, right? And in the intersection, and it's like slow motion. It's like ripping through the cab. I can feel the glass hitting me in the face. And then it's over in an instant. And then all of a sudden I'm back in my car driving down the 5 back home from work. And I was like, what is that? I thought, this is no less weird than anything else that has happened in this experience. I'm not even surprised by it anymore. And furthermore, like at this point, I've kind of have this realization that, maybe I'm going to die. Everyone's going to die. Who cares? I had no reaction to them showing me that. I wasn't like, oh my God, tell me when and where so I can get out of it. Mm-hmm. I didn't care, and then as I'm getting off the freeway, off the exit ramp, this feeling just hits me like a ton of bricks. It was just, it was the craziest thing I've ever felt in my life. All of a sudden, I could feel everything around me as though it were an extension of myself. I could feel the bugs in the grass on the side of the road. I could feel the other drivers. And it was kind of a little overwhelming at the time. And I wish that I hadn't been driving, because I felt like maybe that was a little bit dangerous, but yeah, it was just this wall of emotion that was not my own. And I recognized that it was coming from all around me. And the feeling just kind of gradually subsided. And I thought, well, that's it. That proves it. I could just feel everything just then. That proves that the universe is just one thing. And I am just a part of that one thing, and I can know that for myself, And so I decided that I would keep going with all of this, and I did keep going. I continued to isolate myself as I had been, and I continued to read these books, and eventually I reached a state where I had that feeling all the time for several months. And accompanying that was, I kind of was like observing the world for the first time, not only with objective reality, but then also as feeling it as a part of myself. Like that tree out there is not any different. There's no separateness. I can feel that tree. I am that tree. I am everything around me. And it allowed me to just kind of observe the world from that perspective for several months. And I could sense like this, I guess in looking it up later, I'm assuming that it's what's described as karmic release, because I could feel like these forces of the universe just kind of whipping about everywhere and interacting with everything. But it was like I was in a bubble, and they would just whip right around me, and they weren't interacting with me, but I could sense them interacting with everything. And I would observe people arguing, and these kind of forces just like whipping around them. And it was a surreal thing, but I think it allowed me to have a certain perspective that I never would have had of the world and the universe otherwise. If that makes any sense.
Yes. I mean, as much as I think is possible, it's, so the karmic release, that's the idea that these forces are whipping around you, affecting other people, but somehow in that moment, you are no longer at the effect of these forces because there's been some type of karmic release, I guess.
Right. Yeah. And this was something that William Walker Atkinson kind of writes about a little bit, but I didn't understand it really until I experienced it. But he talks about how he wrote this book called A Series of Lessons in Raha Yoga. And each chapter in the book comes with a mantra to repeat. And the way he put this book together is that it was a class. And this is back in the early 1900s. And so he would advertise in a magazine, and students would send in and become students in this class. And every chapter was, a bit of material that he would send out to them like once a month or something. And then they would take that on board and practice it. And so he put it together in this book. And he talks about how most people, and this is the hardest part of the journey, that most people will do no better than to partially lift themselves onto the higher plane of existence. But those who can reconcile these paradoxes and work through it can exist entirely on this higher mental plane. And, I kind of read that later as I'm going through this, and I'm like, no way, this is what this guy is talking about. This is exactly what I'm experiencing. And he even says in there that he there's this aside that he put in the book, and And it was a correspondence to his students at the time. And he says, some of the students of this class are writing to me complaining that they are in, extreme pain and anguish. And he says, always preceding the birth, there are always the pains of labor, and that this is natural. And just keep going, and you're eventually going to get there, And I mean, his words were a lot more profound than that. But in reading it, I was like, no way that this guy, he just describes this experience to a T. How did he know this stuff? And it was just because he had been through it, And it's simple as that. And so, like myself, I wrote my book to help people, and he wrote his books for the same purpose, to help people.
Absolutely. So you had this state of heightened awareness for some period of time. I've heard you describe that you seem to have the ability to sometimes get information that you shouldn't have known.
Yeah.
I heard a story in a podcast I listened to recently where you describe that you were able to put an animal to sleep. It was one of your friend's dogs, kind of using the same approach that you think the entities might take with you, where there's this heaviness feeling and your
Right.
hands got hot and the dog was snoring while he was being medically attended to in a way that shouldn't have been happening.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And, my thought was, if they can do that, well, why can't I do that?
Mm-hmm.
And so I thought, well, let me try. And then this was just happened to be the perfect opportunity to try something like this, because my roommate's dog had been in a fight with a groundhog. And the groundhog had bit her ear, and it was bleeding a lot, and it wouldn't stop. And so he put what is that? The silver nitrate. He got silver nitrate and was going to put it on her ear. And he said, help me here. He's like, you're going to have to hold her down because this is going to hurt like hell. And I know that it hurts like hell because I've had wounds that have had to be treated with silver nitrate. And I'm not sure if you've ever had that, but it burns. It is, oh my gosh. It's
kind of like peroxide, but a lot worse.
Oh yeah. It's probably like that times 10, maybe. So I'm holding her there, and I thought, let me just calm myself and just think about sleep, and think about that sleep going through my hands and into her. And so she's laying there, and then all of a sudden she's snoring. She's like, and he's putting the silver nitrate on her ear. And before he did that, he's like, hold her down. This is going to hurt, so I was like, just holding her calm. And so he puts it on there, and he's like, oh, wow, she's not reacting to that at all, and he thought that was kind of odd. But, and I of course didn't talk about this stuff with him, so he didn't, he didn't know any of that. And there was another time where, and of course, all of these things I think are things that can be done, right? But I think that they require, number one, that you're in that state of nirvana, and I think they also maybe require that you work at it. Right? It's just like any other skill. You have to hone it and fine tune it and just become good at it. It's not something that you can do it off the top of your head once or twice, but you've really got to work at it to be able to do it whenever you want to do it, And there was another time where I was talking to someone, and they had like a secret from me, and I said, well, tell me. And they wouldn't tell me. And so I looked him in the eye and I wanted to know. I had that intent that I want to know. And like instantly in my mind's eye, I knew what it was, and I told him what it was, and he was a little freaked out by that. He didn't like that at all. Mm-hmm. But these things happen. Mm-hmm. And if you were to ask me to do that again, could I do that again? I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know how I did it the first time, exactly. Mm-hmm. But I know that I did.
Mm-hmm. And eventually this state of heightened awareness, what you could call nirvana, it left quite suddenly. If I recall from your book, you felt suddenly a tension in your shoulders that had been gone for a while. This state lasted for, how long did it last roughly?
I think it was like 3.5 months, something like that.
Okay.
It was most of the summer. It was there. And then, I was at work one day and it just shut off, and I felt it shut off immediately. I knew, it was gone, because immediately I could no longer, it was that connection is so powerful that you can almost see it. And when it left me, I could almost see it leaving me, and I guess I was walking differently even when I was connected, because, like as you said, I immediately noticed this kind of tension in my shoulders that was suddenly there, that had not been there for a long time, and I noticed it too driving home from work. It was a little disorienting because I could no longer sense the other drivers on the road. So I felt kind of a little bit lost, like I didn't know what they were going to do. It was a little scary, honestly. But I since kind of try to revisit this every season,
right,
and come back to it.
Well, yeah, that gets us into the really part 2 of your book. We've really only covered, I don't know if your book's in parts, but it basically, part 2 is where we start getting into some of the philosophical things that you've discovered in your journey, and it talks a lot about the seasons of initiation. Yeah. We can find with the
Eleusinian mysteries.
Eleusinian mysteries, yeah.
Yeah.
And you found, you looked into, I don't know if it was William Ackerson's books or maybe it was Mabel Collins, but you discovered that the state of heightened awareness leaving you is natural. It happens. Yeah. It wasn't that you did something wrong or that you were, being cast out of the garden. This is a normal part of the process.
Yeah, and Mabel Collins writes about this. She talks about in her book, I think it was in Our Glorious Future. She discusses that you'll come upon this great storm, which of course is like all of the turmoil and everything of initiation. But then will come the peace and calm that follows the storm. And she said, you may experience this peace and calm for a matter of days or months or years, but it will end, And so it did. I mean, it did. It just does with everyone. And I do think that that's natural for us right now, but I feel like it doesn't have to be that way. Mm-hmm. It is that way for us just because we don't know how to hang on to it. And our society and our world is not set up to accommodate this in any way. Because most people have no understanding that this is something that can actually happen.
Right.
they dismiss all of this as religion. I, of course, look at a lot of people have these kind of kooky ideas of what it means to be spiritual. I view psychology, human psychology, and spirituality as the same thing. It's about keeping this clean, manicured mind and disciplined mind, and that's what it. That's kind of what it means to be spiritual, in my opinion. But yeah, it leaves you, and this is also Joseph Campbell describes this in human mythology as the hero's journey, right? Mm-hmm. Because this hero's journey is present in all of human mythology, right? The hero will. He starts out as this normal person, and then he goes through these extraordinary things, and then he returns once again to the mundane physical world, and that's the story of all of this. This experience that I had, this hero's journey. There's a reason they talk about it in mythology, and that's because it's always been happening. I open my book with a bit of Greek mythology in the Homeric hymn to the goddess Demeter, and it was the myth that was central to the Eleusinian mysteries in Greece. And it's about this goddess whose daughter gets abducted and taken to hell, the underworld, by Hades. And Demeter, her daughter Persephone, is abducted. She wanders the earth, depressed, covers herself in a dark cloak and a veil so no one can see her face, and she disguises herself as an old woman. And in reading this, you also can do research into the paranormal and how many people experience these nighttime visits by an old lady, right?
Right.
Like the old hag, I think is what they call her. Mm-hmm. And so that's not something new either.
Right.
And so this is how the Greeks described it. So it's Demeter. She's wandering the earth, wandering these mortal cities. And she comes across the daughters of the Lord of Eleusis at this well. And they kind of ask, they come to this old woman and they say, hey, who are you? Why have you wandered so far from the city? And she says, well, I just want to do a woman's work, And so they're like, well, come back to the palace with us and you can take care of our younger brother. He's not well. So she goes to the palace with the girls, and she starts caring for this young boy. And she's an immortal goddess, so she's very powerful. And so she decides that she's going to repay this family for their kindness towards her. So she's going to place this boy into a fire to burn like a log every night, to burn away his mortal soul. The mother, of course, discovers her doing this one day and becomes upset. She screams out loud as she's burning her little boy in a fire. And so, she reveals herself as the goddess Demeter and says, lady, you've made a huge mistake here. I would have turned your son into an immortal god, but now he's only going to be immortal for a short time just by virtue of having sat in my lap and slept in my immortal arms. And so she then demands that this temple be built to her, the goddess Demeter, at the foot of the Acropolis. And so the people obey, and they do that. And she remains at this temple, the goddess Demeter, for a year. And she teaches the people how to deliver the holy rite for themselves. And this was a rite that was never to be spoken of. And of course, I think this rite was the experience that I had. These were they were facilitating this in society through what they called the mysteries. These schools that you could be initiated into.
Right. So this mythology, this story of Demeter could have been, for all we know, some type of a visitation.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that you had someone, in antiquity, just like me, who went through this and kind of had these experiences, the old hag or whatever. And so they wrote this hymn, and this hymn became central to the mystery because it's a myth, but it's also allegory for the entire experience, right? Of being burned in a fire every night to burn away your immortal soul. It's a very painful, unsettling, uncomfortable experience, and that's how they described it, as burning like a log in a fire every night.
Which sounds exactly like your experience. I mean, that would be one way to describe what you went through.
Right. And so, that was what the initiates couldn't talk about, what all of that meant. But, the Greeks, I'm told that they had a word for cracking the illusion of reality. And that this was a part of the mysteries as well. And that, of course, is it falls in line with everything that happened to me, right? Everything just, to me, it makes perfect sense. Mm-hmm. And I only came to this conclusion because I didn't even know about any of this, the Eleusinian mysteries and all of that. But I had been meditating one day, which is something that I rarely do, by the way. And I saw, in my mind's eye, I got this picture of this white barked tree with these dark spots on it, and there were yellow leaves falling to the ground, and it lasted like 2 seconds, but it was so vivid and so real. I was like, what is that? What are those trees? What's significant about this that I saw? Was it the trees? Was it the place? What is it? Mm-hmm. And so I started doing a little bit of research, and eventually I found out that these were poplar trees. And so I started reading about the myth of the poplar tree. And Demeter's daughter, Persephone, would keep, there's a mythology where she keeps groves of poplars right outside the entrance to the underworld. And I talk about the mythology of the poplar, about how they're, seemingly they're these separate, different trees unto themselves. But if you do a little bit of digging underground, you find out that this is just one singular, whole forest of these trees is just one entity, right? Mm-hmm. They're all linked through their root system, but you'd never know that until you start to dig them up, and you can see these roots. And so within mythology, these were, it was an allegory for the human race, the way we are, right? We think that we're these separate entities, and that we're separate from each other and separate from the world, and everything is just separate. And that's not the reality. The reality is that everything is connected. Mm-hmm. We just don't know it yet.
Right.
But you can, you can know it for yourself.
So that one little blip that you saw in meditation, the little quick image of the poplar trees, that is really how you started to stumble upon the Greek mythology and the I still can't say it, the
Eleusinian mysteries. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. And you really follow those clues. That's one thing that I think that has taken you so far. You see a little image like that and you grab a hold of that, and you're going to try to figure out what it is and do whatever research you need to do.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I do that all the time. And what that has helped me do, too, is since writing this book, I have people who contact me every season. And when I say season, what I'm talking about is the initiation season. Yeah. Yeah, which starts in, around October-ish and goes through till the end of summer. So basically it encompasses kind of a year, but the depths of it are in the depths of winter, right? Where you have this whole death and resurrection, not only within your own psyche, but in the world around you, because we're inseparable from our environment, right? So things die in the winter, and then they're reborn in the spring, just like we are. And so that's the whole idea. But you read these myths, and scholars will tell you, they're just poetically talking about the changing of the seasons. Well, no, this is much deeper than that, and they knew it. And you got to ask yourself, if this is just poetry about the changing of the seasons, why is this myth still told today? 2,000 years later, we still have the text of this myth. Why has that survived? Of everything that has ever been put into print, why are there these works that still survive today? And I think it's because there were always people who understood them. There were always initiates who understood the allegory of these myths, and they kept them alive and passed them down. And that's why we still have them today, because the truth has always been the truth, regardless of where or when you existed. It's always been.
To your knowledge, is there any story in Greek mythology that features some type of a rape like what you went through? I'm just wondering if there is.
So the whole story of Persephone being abducted by Hades is that Hades wanted Persephone to be his wife. And so when people talk about this, and they refer to it as the rape of Persephone, right? But really, it's just the abduction of Persephone is what they're kind of talking about. But it's the actual story is known as the rape of Persephone.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, you look at Göbekli Tepe and stuff like that. In that area, there are all these depictions, not necessarily at Göbekli Tepe, but on the outskirts of that, there are, you'll find little figurines that are very old that show gods, with an erect penis, or a female god depicted nude, kind of in a sexual position. So this has always been a thing as well. And I didn't really talk about this, but in the book I wrote about an experience where I met a child that resulted from this incident. And I'm not sure if you remember that in the book or not.
I absolutely do not. I don't know how I missed that.
Yeah, so
I remember a story that you told your brother, and he was like, "Oh, cool! You got your genetics or kids up in space somewhere," and you didn't necessarily find that amusing at the time. But I don't remember this story.
Yeah, so when I was in this kind of state of nirvana, I was asleep one night, and I woke up, and I had my hands were crossed like this, and I was laying on my hands. And I was like, oh, this is kind of a weird position to wake up in. And I realized I couldn't move. So I was like, oh, something is going to happen here. But I was told, open your hand. And so I opened my hand, and I felt this small hand placed in mine. And it was, I could feel it had the same skin texture as that blue female. And they started pulling the hand away, and I could feel its fingers were much longer than normal human fingers would be. And as it pulled away, I felt kind of this static around my hand. it's the only way I could describe it. It was like these, like how when you have something that's full of static and you run it across something and you hear that, you can hear it like going off. And I felt that around my hand, and I got this mental impression of like particle entanglement and reincarnation. And there was a female voice that said, "So you can come back to us." And I was like, oh, maybe that's what this is all about. Like my DNA with them is now some kind of evidence of my next highest potential. And that would be the natural way for that to happen. I'm not sure if that makes sense to you. It made sense to me at the time.
Yeah, I do remember reading that part of the book, and then that segues into the Teletubby kind of Teletubby-like entities that you have a little adventure with, and pretty much holding hands and having a good time. Right. Yeah, I do remember that part though, and I can't say that it makes total sense. The particle entanglement does, and I'm not quite sure what that's leading towards though.
I don't know. I think that everything that happens, obviously, is happening on the smallest level as well, and that is that the smallest level is where things are really being actuated. I guess maybe like that smallest level of physics is where things are really happening that manifest everything we see around us, right? And so
kind of like they say that the astral level of things, some people call that the etheric precedes the physical. So thought influences the astral, which eventually can manifest into the physical in some way.
Yeah, and I think that that's just what it is. I mean, and I don't know how, but I mean, obviously that's going to have something to do with DNA and stuff like that. And so I don't know. Like,
but when the voice said, "So you can return to us," what I was thinking you were meaning was that some kind of a next incarnation kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Like that this entanglement somehow will enable you to incarnate with them, or
right.
Is that what you're thinking? Or
yeah, I think so. I mean, that's, and in these books that I was reading by William Walker Atkinson, that's one of the things he talks about is that you will always reincarnate to your highest potential. And so having read that, I think he said that in his book, The Life Beyond Death. And I after having this experience, I was like, oh, maybe that's what he's talking about. And maybe the only way that this can be actuated in some way is for me to be in that state of nirvana, and for them to have my DNA so that I'm connected. And then I have this kind of particle entanglement thing going on that will then suck me into that in the next life. That I don't know if that makes it. Maybe it's something like that. I really don't know, but it's got to have something to do with that.
And is that what you meant by you met your child, or was that something else?
Yeah, and I don't really think that was a child in the sense that we would describe a child. I mean, I think that we have this idea in our head that when we have a child, that's this child is having its first experience at something, and that's just not true. That child could have been your your great grandfather or your one of your next door neighbors that had passed away. Who knows? I mean, and I find that very interesting. I don't know if you know the University of Virginia. University of Virginia, I think it is doing studies on reincarnation. And one that I found was particularly interesting was there was a child who his mother noticed him saying some things. He was talking about his other mother with the pretty hair, and he was able to tell her what his name was. And so they kind of looked that up, and they found that and they tested this with him. He used to talk about his other mother would take him to the playground near where they lived. And so they showed the kid pictures of playgrounds, right? And they knew who this other kid was that he said he was. And this kid had died in a tragic accident involving his babysitter a few years prior to him being born. And so they showed him the playground that this mother used to take her child to, and pictures of other playgrounds. And they said, which playground did your other mother take you to? And he was able to pick it out, and he's very young, like, I don't know, maybe 5, 6, something like that. And the crazy thing about it is that in his previous life, and I'm only saying this because I want to dispel any rumors that this has anything to do with it whatsoever, because I've heard people talk about race, and that is just bogus. So this kid, he was black in his previous life, and he was a white boy now. So I've heard people say, because people have written books about this, that race somehow plays into this, and I think that that's just total bunk.
Plays into what?
Just, human experience, and that there's like a hierarchy according to race. And that I want to say right now that that's BS.
Absolutely.
Don't even, people have come to me with that kind of stuff, and I'm like, oh no.
Wow.
Now you can take that somewhere else, because that's not anything I believe in. Yeah,
for sure. I'm going to start wrapping up, but before we do, I just want to go back to that experience we were just talking about, where you another visitation you had, and there was a small arm resting in your hand, and you were talking about that particle entanglement. Was that, I was under the understanding from your book that small arm was one of the arms from these Teletubby-looking like creatures that you hung out with. Was that the case, or this was like a...
No, I couldn't open my eyes during this experience, but it felt like the skin of the blue lady. So I
okay, I didn't make that connection. So this small arm, that's what she meant by the child.
Yeah.
Okay, it was like the progeny of your interaction with the blue lady. Okay. But didn't the Teletubby looking creatures happen during that same experience, or was that a different one?
That was a little while later.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I got those mixed up then.
But I was still in that state of nirvana when this happened. And that I was in bed one night again, and I woke up in my room, and I could sense someone standing behind me. And I thought to myself, I wasn't expecting any visitors tonight. What's this? And so I feel this hand on my shoulder, and it kind of turns me over, and it's looking down at me, and I can see it's wearing these same goggles, right?
That's the gnome.
Yeah. And I could see him blinking underneath the glass of the goggles, and he's looking at me, and he says, "Don't be afraid." And he's like kind of rubbing his hand on my hair. And I was like, "I'm not afraid." And he's like, he says, he starts to get really happy, and he's like, "Then come with me," And he grabs my hand, and pulls me out of the room. And I'm like holding his hand going down the stairs, and I was like, hey, hold on, I'm gonna fall down the stairs if we keep going this fast. But I realized he was floating and I was floating too, but I was like kicking my legs. I think I made the joke that I look like a chihuahua that you had taken out of the water, and it's like still swimming even though it's above the water. So anyway, he takes me to the back door, and we're standing there, and all of a sudden these other two beings come out of my roommate's room, and they have instruments in their hands that looked like they were made out of pewter. And one of them had this cup in its arm and was twisting the lid onto it. And I kind of had the impression that maybe they were taking genetic material from him. Mm-hmm. And they stopped dead in their tracks as soon as they saw me standing there in the kitchen. And they were like, whoa, and I kind of said, I was like, hi. And then one of them said, oh, hello, friend, in this very upbeat, happy voice. And so then we head out the back door, and I'm still holding this one guy's hand, and he takes me to the end of the driveway and looks both ways. I assume we're crossing the street. But then he's like, let's go now. And he heads back, and there's this craft that lights up in the driveway with kind of lights all around it. And there's this square door, and the other two beings just kind of float in that square door. And then he takes me in, and we're sitting there, and we're just kind of having pleasant conversation. There's one of them has its back to us, and I assume he's steering the craft somehow. I don't really know. There weren't any windows on it. It was like just this brilliant white light inside of it, with a small table in the center. And it was very cramped. It was not a large craft. But I was smiling the whole time, and they asked me, why are you exposing your teeth? And I said, well, it's how we express happiness. And they were like this, they kind of were like giggling, but this was all telepathic, right? And so one of them is trying to like stretch its face to make itself smile, and he couldn't do it. And it was like this big giggle moment. And then they said something about my roommate's dog, because he would sleep with his dog in the bed with him at night. And one of them was like, oh, yes. And they were talking about how pretty her fur was. And they said, oh, yeah, she loves him very much, about about the way the dog felt about my roommate, right. Obviously. And then, suddenly they're dropping me off at the back door, and two of them are hanging out the square door, and they're waving at me, and they're like, goodbye, friend, and I'm like, bye. And I vaguely remember going back into the house and going back to bed, but it was a very odd experience.
And you woke up the next morning and recalled all this.
Oh yeah. And I wrote it all down in my journal, because the whole time I'm keeping a journal about everything that's happening to me.
Okay.
I didn't realize I was going to write a book later, but it turns out it was a good idea that I kept the journal, because it helped me to write the book later.
Had you always kept a journal prior to?
No, I had not. It was actually something that I read in that William Walker Atkinson wrote. He said, that it's important to keep a journal, not only for yourself, but for future generations. And so I was like, okay, I guess that's what I'll do.
Okay.
I started doing it.
And these entities we were just talking about, am I recalling correctly that they looked like Teletubbies vaguely, or?
Yeah, I mean, they had very small, spindly legs. They were floating. They had like a fat face and kind of fat bodies, and the one piece suit that they were wearing was like it just made them look like a Teletubby. They were just kind of fattish and no legs really. It was very odd. The two of them that came out of my roommate's room were in like red suits, and the one that I was holding his hand, he had a gray suit on. I'm not sure if that was a indication of gender, maybe, or something. I'm not really sure.
Well, the Teletubbies, they do like to dress up in different colors, so it's not atypical. And you say they were wearing goggles similar to the gnome-like creature, but as far as you know, these were different species as far as how they appeared otherwise?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. They were totally different.
Okay.
Because as I said, the gnome guy, he had like a locked white beard and kind of a large nose. He looked. I mean, a yard gnome is the only way I can describe him, because he was just that short too, you know. And I don't know if he was floating or not, the yard gnome guy, because he was just standing at the end of my nightstand,
right?
You know, and I never saw him leave or arrive. He was just there, you know.
Have you ever considered having someone do some graphical sketches or illustrations of some of the entities that you interacted with?
I mean, I would like to. I don't know anybody who's really a great artist, though. I don't, and nobody's asked me. Nobody said, "Hey, I'm an artist. You know, I'll do it if you want." I mean, I would love to have someone do that. I mean, I think that would be really neat. But
I'm sure there's somebody out there. So if you're listening to this and you want to help Matthew out with that, they can reach you by Facebook. He's pretty responsive.
Oh, yeah.
Matthew, believe it or not, I think we've just scratched the surface on what I wanted to cover with you, because the other side of this, we covered a little bit, but you have a lot more to say about Stoicism, which we kind of talked around, but I really would like to get more into your understanding of Stoicism and get a little more practical about how people can start to apply different ways of working with their emotions and how they're thinking about things to become ripe for this type of initiatory experience. Because you said at some point that this is why you think you were ripe or ready for this type of experience, is because you, in some ways, did approach things from a Stoic point of view. And I don't think a lot of people even really understand what Stoicism is. I think people, when they hear Stoicism, they think of someone who is basically has no emotions and is repressing their emotions. And I don't think that that's what Stoicism is. So I'd like to talk with you more about that and what this concept of the seasons of initiation. So I'm hoping that you can join me again and we can kind of get into part 2 of where this experience led you in a deeper way.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I'd be delighted to come back.
All right, that'd be great. Well, thanks so much for spending some time with me today for this episode, and we'll have you back real soon.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everybody.